Now, for some of our folks who this is their first time with us, somebody want to kind of summarize some of what we've been storing about so far?
About Joseph's family.
Okay, about Joseph's family.
We saw
Yes.
Joseph's family as they moved from Shechem up to Bethel. Did they move to Bethel?
Bethel, yeah.
And how they did that, they left their household gods and did that. Seems to be some sort of change in Jacob's life. And then we also talked about Joseph's dreams, about his possibly his family bowing down to him, although he left interpretation up to his parents and his brothers. And some of the things that we're learning about Joseph and his family is that they do have the familial trait of possibly withholding some aspects of evidence and truth to let people draw their own conclusions that may be erroneous.
Right.
And it's interesting.
And do you remember what had happened to Joseph last time we dealt with Joseph? We kind of skipped a day. Where was he? What had happened to him?
Well, he was in a pit where his brothers threw him, and then
Right.
they took him out and sold him to the Ishmaelite traders, taken to
Okay.
Egypt.
Okay. And they took him to Egypt, and Reuben, he just kind of,
Awesome.
freaked out. All right. Well, now we're picking up the story. Joseph has been taken to Egypt, and he has been sold to an officer of Pharaoh's court who was the head of Pharaoh's guards in Egypt. And Pharaoh put Joseph in charge of his household and his fields, and because of that, God blessed everything that Pharaoh did, or that Pharaoh had. And so that brings us, or not Pharaoh, excuse me, Potiphar. I can't believe I was saying that. Yes, Larry.
I'm at Dallas Seminary, and I've been doing that story for a class. If you're doing Potiphar's wife, is this the temptation of Potiphar and his wife?
It's the first part.
Okay.
The first part.
If it goes from he was handsome in form and appearance, and it keeps going.
Yeah,
Well, I can do that one if you're interested.
Yes.
I do. I'm doing it for a grade, so hopefully I know it.
Okay. Oh, I love it. I love it, love it, love it.
Okay, here we go.
I'm doing verses 5 through 9. So what verses are you doing, just so I know?
Well, if I go over your verses, you can redo it one more time. How's that?
Basically, I'm stopping with this because we're going to do it again on Wednesday, the next part. But I'm stopping with, how could I sin against God?
Okay, I could probably stop at that.
Does that help?
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, man.
So, okay, so here is God's story. Joseph was handsome in form and face, and Potiphar's wife cast her eyes upon him longingly, and she said, "Lie with me." And he said, "My master is not concerned with anything. He has handed everything into my hands. No one in the house is greater than me. The only one that he's concerned about is you, because you are his wife. How could I do this great evil and sin against God?" That's what.
Very good. Oh, thank you, Larry. Yeah, excellent, excellent. So, and I'm gonna retell the story, adding just a little bit before that.
Yeah. Okay.
For some context, but you were spot on. So this will add a little bit of the beginning part of the story. So from the time that Potiphar, put Joseph in charge of his household and all that he owned, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house because of Joseph. The Lord's blessing was on all that Potiphar owned, his house and in his fields. Potiphar left all that he owned under Joseph's authority. And he didn't concern himself with anything except for the food that he ate. Now, Joseph was well built and handsome. And after some time, his master's wife looked longingly at him, and she said, "Sleep with me." But Joseph, he refused, and he said to her, "Look, my master doesn't concern himself with anything in his house, and he's put everything he owns under my authority. Nobody in the house is greater than me. He's not withheld anything from me except for you, but because you're his wife. How could I do this immense evil? How could I sin against God?" And that's our story from God's Word. So I'm going to get you guys to kind of help me out here. And again, this is not an easy story. All right, there's because there's the whole house thing is really easy to get confusing. So from the time that Potiphar put Joseph in charge of his what? Of his of his household and
All that he had.
all that he owned.
God bless.
God bless.
Yeah, the Lord blessed. I find this interesting. The Egyptian's house because of who?
Because of Joseph.
Yeah, because of Joseph. The Lord's blessing was on everything that Potiphar owned in his house and and his fields. Very good. Potiphar left all that he owned under whose authority?
Joseph.
Yeah, under Joseph's authority. And he didn't concern himself with anything except for what?
His food.
Yeah, what he was going to eat. Now, Joseph was
Well built.
Well built.
and
Handsome.
there you go. And handsome. And so after some time, his master's wife, she looked how? Longingly at Joseph, and she made a suggestion.
Sleep with me.
Sleep with me.
Sleep with me. Yeah. And Joseph said, "Well, can we make sure that we don't get caught? Is there some place we could go that nobody would know?"
No.
No.
No, he didn't say that.
He didn't say that. What did he do?
He said, how
He
can
ran
I
away.
How could I sin against God?
He said no. And Jonathan, you are right. He is going to run away, but he doesn't yet. So that is in our next story, but not quite this one. He said he refused, and he said to her, "Look, my master doesn't concern himself with what?
Anything.
Anything in his house, and he's put what under my authority?
Everything.
Yeah, everything under my authority, and there's not anybody in the house who's what?
Greater than me.
Who's greater than me. My master has withheld
Nothing.
nothing from me except
You, because you are his wife.
because you are his wife." Very good. So how could I do this?
Evil.
Yeah, how could I do this immense evil? And how could
I sin
Sin against God.
How could I sin against God? So, wow. You know, I wonder what it might be like to be a man under great authority and power, and suddenly you buy a slave, right? And everything in your life starts going better. And you recognize that there's something special about this slave. What might that be like to be Potiphar and find this gem of a servant? What might he be feeling?
Happy days.
It's the lottery there.
Okay, happy days. All right, yeah.
The lottery.
Excitement.
Win the lottery. All right.
Excitement.
Excitement. Yeah. Yeah.
Surprise. Surprised. He's such a
It's
young
like
guy.
from any worries,
Okay. Surprise, Cheryl.
relief from any worries you might have had before that.
Wow. Relief. Yeah. Yeah. So, well,
Then Potiphar put him under. Oh, I'm sorry. Then Potiphar put him under authority, like below
Yeah.
Potiphar.
yeah, that's what the story says.
Like,
Potiphar put him under authority in his house. So, all right. Well, let's look at the first part of the story. So, from the time that Potiphar put Joseph in charge of his household and all that he owned, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house because of Joseph. The Lord's blessing was on all that Potiphar owned in his house and in his fields. Potiphar left all that he owned under Joseph's authority. He didn't concern himself with anything except for what he ate. And so let's just stop right there. So from the moment that Potiphar put Joseph in charge of his household, the Lord started blessing Potiphar's house and his fields and everything he owned. So I'm curious, what might we learn about God from the fact he's blessing? I mean, well, first of all, listen, Potiphar is, what was his job that we said in the introduction? You remember?
Chief
Was
police.
the captain of
the guards. Yeah, officer of Pharaoh's house.
the second one in charge.
Do you think that included a lot of worship of Jehovah God?
No.
I mean, based on moral standards, I mean, what do you think this guy would have had some of the same kind of standards that Joseph grew up with in his house? Although we know his family had some problems too, right?
But just the fact that he bought him as a slave to begin with doesn't mention that he had a salary or anything, just that he's a slave and expected to work for Potiphar.
Yeah, he was.
So
Yeah, and by the way, it's killing me. I've always pronounced this as Potiphar, but the spelling is pretty clearly Potiphar. So
I'll go with Potiphar for today. So I think that morally speaking, Potiphar is looking out for number one more than anything else.
right. So, somebody else. What's your initial gut reaction to Potiphar from, like Andrew said, he bought this guy.
Well, he's somebody that the Pharaoh trusts. He may be a man of good judgment.
Okay, all right.
He may not have that good judgment if his wife is chasing after Joseph.
Yeah, hold on to that. We're going to talk about that some more.
He seems like a very busy person. With
Busy,
lots
all right.
of things to do.
Got a lot of stuff going on.
Distracted.
This is what I wrote about Potiphar. He was in a high position, quite trusted by Pharaoh. He was wealthy with a large house and many servants, probably married to a beautiful high society woman. His job kept him very busy and was probably away from home much of the time. He was a good judge of character because he saw things in the teenage Joseph that gave all the management duties to him. He could have had Joseph killed. That's later in the story. So
Yeah.
he's a man of principle.
Yeah. And we'll definitely talk about that on Wednesday, because that's a great point. So the Lord blessed this guy who had some issues. Did the Lord just give him a little blessing or a lot of blessing?
A lot of blessing.
So what might we learn about God from the fact he blessed this, I think it's safe to say, ungodly man, right? Would you all agree with that?
No,
You don't see him as an ungodly man?
no.
He made an ungodly woman.
Okay, yeah, he did. And we're not there yet, but yeah. So Diane, explain a little bit.
I just don't think there's enough there to make judgments about Potiphar.
Okay.
He's a man of he's a man of high position, and he has a household that apparently has a number of people in it. He works for Pharaoh, but I don't feel like we can judge him just based on the fact that he does not know the God of Joseph.
All right. But now, can we agree that he doesn't know the God of Joseph?
I think so.
It seems likely he doesn't.
And yet God blesses him anyway, right?
Mm-hmm.
So does that, might we learn anything? Yeah, Marty.
Well, he's blessing him through Joseph. And what I see about God is Joseph is nobody here. He's just a slave.
Yeah.
And young. And yet God is blessing Joseph, using Joseph to bless the whole household.
Ooh.
God obviously appreciates this character he must see in Joseph because he's using him even though he's nobody. And obviously God's character in Joseph is causing him to do his very best. And so God is shown that way.
Wow. Wow.
And what I'm saying there is that God is a covenant-keeping God. The covenant that God had made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is following Joseph. And so he is blessing the household because of Joseph, like Nadia said.
Wow. Right. Do you see anything about Potiphar in here that?
Potiphar is willing to let things, if he's got somebody that knows what they're doing, it seems like he's willing to let it go. He's just concerned with what he eats in the household. So God is blessing his fields and everything in his house. So, you know, the scriptures tend to speak well of soldiers of high position. So it would seem that this one also, there's nothing wrong with him. I mean, he hadn't done anything wrong except buy a slave, which seemed to have been the cultural thing to do back then. But then he seems to treat his slave well, is that he put everything under him. All authority of the household is under him because he's doing well by it. So Potiphar's only concerned with what he eats in the household. If he's got other duties, take care of the king's guard, he's the captain of the guard. I'm sure there's threats on Potiphar's life like any other king. Seems to be his biggest responsibility.
Now I have a question. What is Potiphar's job?
He's the captain of the guard.
He's the head of the protection detail for Pharaoh.
Which would be a level of trust. And I'm curious, based on what Potiphar does with Joseph, do you see anything about trust in his actions?
He's trusting Joseph in the same way the king trusts him.
it hits me that soldiers are very often, when they first sign up or first become soldiers, are often quite young.
Yeah.
So as a man who's been in the military perhaps for some time, he doesn't have any problem seeing this young guy as having potential. Because he's used to giving responsibilities, serious responsibilities to young men, whereas someone in business might be more reluctant to do so as quickly.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, I like that. That's.
He probably
Yeah.
saw. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that because we don't see him micromanaging his household, but he was willing to leave everything in the hands of Joseph.
Mm-hmm.
I love that word of micromanaging, which
He probably was able to trust Joseph as the person in charge, because he knew that he was a God-fearer and that he wouldn't do anything bad.
right. And I'm curious about that. Based on what we see here in this story, do you think it's likely that he did see God's hand on Joseph?
I think so.
It says from the time that he put everything under Joseph's authority, that things just went. That's not the literal Hebrew, but
The story says it's because the Lord blessed Joseph, I think.
yes, yeah,
But
repeatedly.
Potiphar it doesn't say anything about Potiphar's acknowledgement of that.
No, it doesn't.
As far as
But-
Potiphar is concerned, Joseph is just a good manager. Or it's a good season. Who knows? The story doesn't say.
Yeah, yeah.
But
He doesn't
Right.
have anything against foreigners. That's one thing we see.
Okay, yeah,
Oh, I like that.
right.
I wonder if he's ever said anything about God, because he does to the wife, how can I sin against God? I wonder if he's ever mentioned God to Potiphar.
Yeah, hold on to that for a minute, because I do want to go there, because it is clear he's later on in the story we do see that he gives testimony.
Yeah.
But
This is the problem of taking just the intro to the story, because later on he puts him in jail. He listens to his wife. So to say that he didn't have a prejudice against foreigners, if that was an Egyptian slave, he could have been treated differently. So once again, there's precious few details given to us to extrapolate way down the road on certain characteristics.
yeah, and when we do the story on Wednesday, there's going to be a lot of discussion about that, because I do think that might tell us some things about Potiphar that it's killing me not to get into.
So just to go back to your question, I'm just wondering that, because I think someone mentioned that Potiphar didn't really, it wasn't because of Potiphar that the household was being blessed. What I'm seeing there is that God did it without anyone prompting him. So it was just God's goodness to Joseph, that goodness, spilled to the household of Potiphar.
Yeah, and it's easy for us to focus on Potiphar and the fact he received economic blessings because of of his recognition of who Joseph was. But were there other people that would have been blessed as well?
Sounds like the whole household was, not just Potiphar, because if his fields were blessed and his household was blessed, then everyone there would have been blessed.
Sure, yeah.
If I were-
there's better food to eat for sure. I mean, the household, if the fields are blessed, then everything that they're eating, and they're eating a lot more of it too. So
Yeah.
everyone's getting healthy.
Yeah.
if I would have been Potiphar, and if I would have seen that the man that I hired, Joseph, was bringing a lot of blessing to me, I would definitely keep him in business.
Okay.
Pharaoh's probably getting blessed even because now Potiphar's not distracted if he was in the past by having, you know, to manage his household and do his job. He can just focus on his job.
Yeah, Cheryl.
Well, I would think it probably is giving a lot of extra free time to Potiphar's wife, which maybe she didn't need that.
So maybe that was not a good thing. Well, you know, Diane, I think you brought up a great observation about the fact that Potiphar was, you know, a military man. And when Joseph says here several times that, you know, everything was placed under his authority. You know, Jonathan, you mentioned he hired Joseph. Did he hire him?
He bought him.
Bought him.
Is that different?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
It's different.
I mean, it says that Potiphar gave Joseph authority over everything in his house and in his fields. I mean, does that seem unusual to you? Somebody you bought is giving authority? I mean, I don't think of a slave as having authority, right?
No.
No.
Because you can. Oh, go ahead then.
I think in a sense you can say that he was hired to the position, wasn't paid for it, of course, but since what Diane mentioned about giving the opportunity to younger people, military, putting them in positions of responsibility, I'm sure Potiphar used the same principles of putting Joseph in different positions of responsibility that he excelled in. And he didn't just immediately place him on the top ladder. That's a foolish thought. But obviously Joseph worked his way up rather quickly when Potiphar realized, well, he can do this. Let's see if he can do that. And if he can do that, well, let's give him something else. And then Joseph is blessed by God to be able to delegate responsibly or whatever he did to be hired in the sense of it just being placed there in that position.
Because we don't know how long he was in Potiphar's home, do we?
No, we don't. We're not given any idea of how long or at what age he was at this point. Just kind of left in the dark there. But
Going back to your question about like he was bought, does that mean if he was hired? I would say that there's probably a difference because you can buy something and not put it to use, or you can buy something and put that to use. And when Potiphar bought Joseph, he put him to work, so in a way he was kind of hiring him.
okay, all right.
I think that Joseph is not a typical slave. Typically, you ended up as a slave either because your people had been subjugated by somebody else, in which case you could be from a variety of classes, or because you were so poor that all you had left was yourself, and maybe you might sell a child to support the rest of the family. But Joseph's going to come in with this demeanor of the beloved son. He's still got that identity, even if his brothers have sold him. In his heart, Joseph probably still sees himself as, I'm the one my father loves. You know, I'm the guy with the striped coat, even if they took my coat. So Potiphar may recognize that this guy doesn't think necessarily like the typical teenage slave that he ends up with.
Well, let's move to the second part of the story. So Joseph was well built and handsome, very, very butch-like. After some time, his master's wife looked at him longingly and said, "Sleep with me." But Joseph refused, and he said to his master's wife, "Look, with me here, my master doesn't concern himself with anything in his house, and he's put everything that he owns under my authority. Nobody in the house is greater than me. My master hasn't withheld anything from me but you, because you're his wife. So how could I do this immense evil? How could I sin against God?" So now we've seen that Potiphar has placed Joseph. I mean, do you see him just one day going, "Hey, wow, I'm going to put you I'm going to put you in charge of everything"?
No. By steps.
By steps. What do you think Potiphar is probably looking at in Joseph's life before he promotes him?
That's right.
I think. Oh.
I think you could trust him.
Okay, trust, right?
He's loyal.
Character.
Loyal. What was that?
I said his character.
His character, right?
All those blessings. Good things just keep happening around this young fella.
Yeah. This guy's getting it done.
He was a
Right.
hard worker, I think.
Hard worker. So he's looking at character. He's looking at Joseph's character, right? What might we learn about Potiphar's wife from what draws her to Joseph based on the story? What was it we're told about him just before she starts looking longingly that
It
he's,
was him.
yeah.
Well built.
Well built.
Good looking. I think he looks like his mom. She was an attractive woman. I think he's inherited his mom's looks.
Okay.
And I think he was well built probably from the hard work, because I doubt if he was working really hard in his father's house. So probably because he was working hard as a slave, he got well built.
Okay. All right. Larry, were you
I
going to add
think
something?
he was born like that.
Mardi.
Oh, I was thinking too, she's probably, she's rich. She's probably a little spoiled. She might be intrigued by what she can't have.
Ooh.
Also.
Ooh.
Yeah.
There's a story in the garden about that, isn't there? So.
Soldiers often delay marriage. Often when they're if this is something that you build up to, working in the palace, it may be that Potiphar's been off, doing campaigns and stuff, delaying starting a marriage. Girls marry very young, and he may be, nice looking for his age, Potiphar. But
Wow. I was gonna say, boy, you love
the
hearing
young
that.
guy, and he's away.
Nice
from
looking for
home.
his age. That was great.
No.
And it's kind of a matter of access too, It's like how many good-looking guys are there around, and if you've got the guy running the household versus the other good-looking guy who just brings in the, runs the errands.
Yeah. All right. Larry?
Yeah, what I see happening is entitled, very rich type lady that is at home bored because all of her life she's just ordered slave. Never had a slave that did not respond positively, and her husband is preoccupied. He does not have to be concerned with the household issues. He's at work, probably leaving early, coming back late, because he can rely on this young guy. And what I see happen is he uses 4 or 5 apologetical oral arguments, and we're going to find out that those are insufficient. That's his first strategy, is an oral kind of reasoning And when you're reasoning with sexual issues, I think reasoning goes out the window.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you brought up something, Larry, that we're told that Potiphar didn't concern himself with anything except for what he was eating. Is there something else that maybe he should have been concerned about?
His wife.
Seems a bit oblivious in that area.
His family. You don't know if he had kids, but
Yeah.
Probably he is, if his wife is being faithful.
Yeah, he seems like he's a trusting guy, and we're going to look into that more again on Wednesday, because there are going to be some issues there as well. But well, let's look at what Larry was talking about. So he when she says, "Hey," let's look at the way sin works here. After some time, his master's wife looked longingly at him. So we talked about how Potiphar was judging Joseph on what he had accomplished. What might we learn about Potiphar's wife from what she's using to judge Joseph? I mean, do you learn anything about her spiritually from what seems to be what draws her?
The physical.
Physical.
Not his character, just his looks.
Yeah.
I think she had a horrible spirit of lust and a fornication inside of her.
Okay.
I think because this blessing happens around Joseph, she's probably just naturally drawn to Joseph, but it doesn't come out in the right way. It's natural to find Joseph attractive because he's blessed. He's good at things. We're drawn to people like that, but then it goes off kilter.
Yeah, goes south. So, yeah.
You said that some time passed. What was the exact phrase?
After some time, his master's wife looked longingly at Joseph.
So it was not right when he first got there, but it was after he had the position of authority.
Wow,
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
So authority can be very attractive. So while Joseph was not, go ahead, Sharon.
No,
No, go ahead.
no, finish. I'm sorry.
While Joseph was not in a position of authority, while he was working his way up, it was not as attractive. He just had a good body. Now he's at the top, so he also has, like, when I look in a mirror, I see something nice, but he's also got the position of authority.
Whose mirror?
Just repeating what I heard my mentor say. Now he's also got authority, which makes him even more attractive now. So maybe it's not just looks, but it's also power, authority that is making him attractive.
Yeah, I like that.
After some time, I'm taking the story when it starts.
Yeah.
I think she wanted to take over his authority. And by getting him to sin with her, he would lose authority because Potiphar is going to find out about, or Potiphar is going to find out about it and make Joseph lose part of his authority, and then his wife might be able to take authority.
Okay, so she may be wanting his authority. All right.
Yes. And just an idea.
Very interesting.
Then she'd have to work. She probably wouldn't want to work.
So she says, "Sleep with me," and Joseph says, "No." And then, like Larry said, he gives this, these apologetic reasons. My master doesn't concern himself with anything in his house. He puts everything he owns. He's put everything he owns under my authority. No one in the house is greater than me, and he's not held anything back from me but you, and that he should have done because you're his wife. So, I mean, what might we learn about Joseph? I mean, do you see him being rebellious? Like, I can't believe this dude bought me. He owns me. I'm a child of Abraham. I mean, what might we learn from him, from his response here? Does it tell us anything about his heart?
Well, he has all the same humility he had back when he had the dreams.
Okay.
Which is not a lot.
Yeah, I was going, I'm just trying to see humility here.
It's like, he still thinks he's, because I could just kind of see the chest popped out a little bit while he's saying those things. They're true, but still.
Cheryl?
It's hard to know how he said it, I mean, he could have said it like in a humble way. It's hard to know because we can't hear him, and I mean, could have was just trying to get her to back off, reason with him, like Larry was saying. One thing I see is that obviously he's learned pretty good Egyptian. Is that what they speak?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I just think that's interesting because he went there he had to learn a new language and everything. But obviously he's pretty intelligent, and so maybe that's part of why he thinks he can reason with this lady.
Okay. Marty, you want to say something? Yeah.
Yeah, well, judging by what we see with God blessing him all this time and blessing Potiphar's household and fields, his character, he must be faithful to God and have a character that's pleasing to God. So obviously there's a relationship there. So I see him having a heart for God and wanting to stay true to him.
Well, I mean, instead of saying, hey, my master has done bringing out the positive things his master had done, did he have another choice in the way he could have responded?
Oh, yeah.
Lots of choice.
What do y'all say?
I just wanted to say one thing before that. I was going to comment the same thing as Mrs. Martin. Is that what your name is?
Oh, sorry.
Martin.
Martin? Okay. I was going to say the same thing, that he was able to prove one more time that he was a God-fearer.
Okay. All right.
That's interesting, Butch, that he only brings up God at the end. Instead, he brings up kind of like what Diane said, all the good things that all the positions that he has now, his authority. He only brings up sinning against God at one point in his defense, instead of making that appeal at the very first. It's what he could have done. He could have said, I'm not going to sin against God, and just ran away or walked away. Said he did kind of blow his own trumpet a little bit there, didn't he, Diane? I like that. Yeah.
Is he blowing his trumpet, or is he blowing Potiphar's trumpet? He's given me authority. He's placed everything under my hands. I mean, what do y'all see there?
Well, can I just say that he's mentioning Potiphar, his relationship, and the authority that's been handed over, but he's not going, you're asking what his choice was. He could have immediately gone to Potiphar, but what you're going to find out is when he runs out of that house, he doesn't go to Potiphar. So there's something going on there, because if you're in a business, often you will go to your superior to sort stuff out. But in this case, he does not go to Potiphar, even though everybody's been talking about this wonderful relationship that he has with Potiphar.
But in this part of the story, where he is giving his reasons to her, his apologetics, as Larry said. I like that word.
Okay, but this is the thing about STS. Context before and after should factor in. So I have a little bit of tension since I've worked on this story. We give a lot of introduction, which has, context previous,
Right.
but I think it's only fair in almost all the stories I do to take into effect some of the full context.
Right, and I'd agree with that. We'll spend a lot of time on Wednesday talking about that issue as it is in the story, and so we're going to address that. It's just because it's not here, we're not going to spend much time talking about it today.
Okay, this is the thing about STS, and I'm sorry I'm coming in brand new with it. A story actually has a plot, a build-up, a conclusion, and so when you say a story, that's why in STS we almost always pick a story that actually is a unit that actually can be treated. So I think everybody needs to realize that there are disadvantages when you take just a very small portion of a story. I think for people cutting their eye teeth on storytelling, it's almost necessary to see the whole picture so that they don't go off into some fanciful ideas about what's going on in this story.
Right. And now when I'm asking about other choices, okay, obviously he could have sinned with a woman, and we're going to look at some things as we go on next week. But as he brings up these points about Potiphar, he's given me authority. He's placed everything under my hat. He's trusted me. What might that tell us about Joseph? As far as this woman is going to sleep with me, and he could have said, well, it's, you're homely or, whatever. But he gives this list of things that his owner has done for him. So what might that tell us about Joseph, about his character? Is he making it about him here, or is he making it about what Potiphar has done for him?
It sounds kind of like he's saying, respect your husband.
It's a very interesting question, which I like that.
He doesn't say anything that Potiphar has done for his wife.
Okay.
So he doesn't go over to that territory of I can't do this, or you shouldn't do this because, which, may be also like not a good way to go. But he could go with that way, like, you shouldn't do this because your husband has done this, this, and this for you. He probably is on safer ground, given their difference in status, to just stay with himself, which is me and Potiphar, and I'm just going to leave you out of this. Potiphar's done this, this, and this, and then at the end, and by the way, you're his wife.
Yeah, and you bring that up. He said he's trusted me with, I can do anything, anywhere. He's trusted me, but he's not trusted you, or not trusted me with you. Do you have the idea there? He's saying, which that's kind of the way it should be, that
You're off limit for me.
Yeah, and I'm also saying that he trusts the position that has been given by Potiphar, and he's respecting that, and he's not wanting to go over that.
I think he appreciates Potiphar, and he appreciates his own position. And I'm pretty sure he recognizes that your sin will find you out. It's just a matter of time.
Okay.
So I think that he appreciates what he has, and he appreciates his boss. And he doesn't mention he wants it against God.
As I was thinking about this story, Do you think Potiphar and his wife got married by a Jewish rabbi in the name of God? I think that's probably what happened. Or do you think they were probably married in some temple of some false god? That
Or just a nice contractual relationship, the exchange of goats and such.
Larry?
That's interesting because Mr. Joseph is going to marry the daughter of a priestess, and was probably, the formal ceremony was done in a temple in Egypt. You know, we don't know, but he obviously married a very high religious leader in Egypt later on here.
Well, so I asked that question to ask this question. So does it seem like he is honoring the sacrament of marriage, even though that marriage might not be a Jehovah-blessed marriage?
Sure.
I mean, does that tell us anything about Joseph's view of the, you know, we can't say holy matrimony, but just matrimony?
Yeah, he respects that.
This is my point of view. If you get married, even if you're not a believer in God, but if you get married and you have like some people that can like as a witness of what you did, and you do it in front of people, and you do it in front of like Catholic priest or in front of a Muslim preacher or whatever, I think it's still called a marriage.
Okay, so it's still marriage regardless, right?
Yeah.
All cultures honor marriage. And I think that is one of God's ways of blessing the whole world, is to put in us a desire for this institution and a desire to respect it. Not every country protects it, and not every culture protects it necessarily very well. But if you were to ask them what the ideal is, I think most every culture would say that harmonious marriages and families with children are desirable.
Yeah.
I think it's always better to get married under Jehovah God's principles. But anyway, but if you don't, well, that's understandable too.
Well, you know, in the first part of the story, we talked a little bit about how God blessed an unbelieving man because of a believing man, you know, because of a believer. Potiphar, everything he had was blessed because of a believer. I always want to be careful because, you know, I have grandkids, and when they start talking about this, they talk about Christians. I don't know that we want to go there in the Old Testament. But today, are there still times that non-believing people are blessed because of believers in their midst? Does that still happen?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, what might that look like?
Yeah.
Can you think of just in general?
I think that a Christian believer would have the fear of God, and so in any business that you're in, the ability to have fraud is just prevalent everywhere.
Yeah.
And I think that a Christian who really loves God would not partake of the fraud or the opportunity to be fraudulent in any way.
Okay, be more trustworthy. All right, Cheryl?
I think of President Trump and the Vice President is a good example.
I think that's probably a good example of obviously it's on dangerous ground there as far as Facebook is concerned. If you you're judging somebody's faith, but I think could be enough evidence there to make a educated guess.
I know a good example. There's this person who is in charge of a drug rehab center down here where we live. And when he first met my dad and mom, he wasn't a believer. He said, "Oh, Americans, gringos. I might be able to get English class out of them." So he was blessed in the way of having free English classes with a believer. And it was a double blessing because later on, he ended up becoming a Christian when he wasn't planning to.
Okay, yeah, that's good.
I worked for many years at a secular university teaching English, and there were always among the teachers believers. And I would pray that all of our unit would be blessed because God has a heart for the nations, and they were being brought to us. And that because of those who had come to serve, and because of this tying in with what I felt God wanted to do, that God would bless that whole unit. And there was just a wealth of dysfunction in the place at different times. But I felt that overall we experienced growth, and there were times when things were tough for our kinds of programs. And I would hear of other programs shutting down. And yet we made it through those times. And there were probably ways you could have looked at it and seen it as earthly, but I felt that it was not. And it wasn't because the believers were so grand or did such a fabulous job. I felt that it was because God blesses because he desires to. It's not necessarily because, it's not because of my goodness or because I'm better, but just because of his graciousness.
Yeah. You know, my wife got a job a couple of years ago at an auto parts store as a delivery driver, just part-time, but just to bring in a little extra money to kind of stretch ends so I could stay on the road. Now, the fact she's willing to work to keep me gone, that's a whole nother story. But she believes in what we're doing. She believes in STS. But as she was working at this place, just one of the roughest environments ever. I mean, you know, just everything you could think of. Just really militant lesbians working there, and a lot of cussing and drug use and those things. And yet, over the years, she was constantly praying for people and talking about her faith and doing those jobs that nobody else wanted to do and not complaining. And so she left a couple of months ago, just before all this happened, when her dad got sick just before he died. And so she went back last week, and she was talking to some of the folks about, you know, man, I'm surprised nobody here has gotten the coronavirus because they are working with the public so often. And they just looked at her and said, well, obviously none of us got it. You've been praying for us. And so God's just answered your prayer. We've known all along you were praying for us, and we haven't been concerned. Yeah, and it's like you've got these people who are so far from the Lord for the most part, who still recognize God's hand, you know, on somebody, and the fact that God would answer their prayer for them, even though they have plainly recognized and shared with her, you know, that they are not believers, nor do they want to be. So, Well, are there things in this part of the story, like Larry said, there is much more of this story yet to come on Wednesday. Some of the, some of the greater ramifications of choices made and choices that could have been made. But in this part of the story, do you see anything that could help you in the future when?
I think for me, that when I see that as soon as Potiphar's wife approaches Joseph, you're like, there's no way out of this. There's no way for this to turn out well, because this is probably not about sex. This is about honor. Potiphar is supposed to be able to control his household. And if it gets out that his young wife is propositioning the help, that looks very bad on him. So he's going to do whatever he can to cover it up. And it's just kind of all over right then. And yet he goes ahead and says the right thing. All he can do, really, there's really nothing, I don't think, that he could have done. When we go through what could he have done or said? There's bad things he could have said. There's other good things he would have said, but I don't think any of them would have changed how this story plays out in terms of it having some negative consequence. Yeah. He's come all the way up, and all of a sudden, this one little disappointed young wife or bored young wife looks like she can make it all come down. But he seems to be trusting in God and affirming the goodness of his master in this point. And so I think that's, and we know the story takes kind of a while for all of this to sort out. And just being patient when God's working things out. Sometimes things happen and we just don't see a way out, but that doesn't mean you can't still say the right thing, do the right thing.
Marty? Oh.
Volume's off. You gotta put your microphone on.
A takeaway, even to pass on to my grandkids, is Joseph was in a very low position at the beginning and very demeaning compared to where he had been in his life. But from the beginning, it seems he always did his very best. It didn't matter what position he was in, he did his best. And I think that's a real lesson.
Yeah.
Taking what Diane said is that there's no way for Joseph to win. He still did not choose the wrong path. And I think that's something that we can take away from this, is that even if you don't think you can win, even if there's a no-win situation, don't take the wrong path.
Yeah.
Take the honorable path, the God path. I like that.
Yeah, I like that too. Cheryl?
Maybe if you're surrounded by unbelievers, or family or wherever, just to do your very best and expect that God's gonna be working in you and in that situation and in those people, and he's gonna surround that place with his blessing, and he's gonna do amazing things. So we can just trust him to do best.
Yeah, and I see that in this part of the story too, that Joseph is aware of God's blessing in his life here. He's, this has happened, and this has happened, and this has happened. It's obviously he's thought through that so that he can bring it out to her when the moment comes. And to me, that's just a reminder of, consistently reminding myself of where God has shown up and the things he's done. Well, this story is in Genesis chapter 39, verses 5 through 9. And on Wednesday, we're going to do the following part of the story where, as somebody just said a minute ago, things go south. And there's some. This has been kind of a foundational thing for the next thing, and so I would suggest that you take this story and kind of review it and go over it over the next day or so, and just stop here at verse 9 and meditate on some of these things to prepare us for the rest of the story. Because as Larry said, there's some, there's a lot more to this story, and this is just the first part. And it is hard to break a story up, but I would rather do that and have people get it than have people not be able to remember the story. That's my preference. So even though I know there's a price, right? So you just have to weigh that out and see whether you're willing to pay it or not. So, but all right, well, let me turn off the recording here.